That's me. If you want to find me on the socials, I go as DNS Michi, which is DNS M-I-C-H-I. Long time ago, I was doing DNS in Vienna in Austria. Now I'm a staff developer advocate at GitLab. Before we dive in, this is a research talk or informal talk. If you want to learn what we do as a product with GitLab and AI, these are the resources. And kind of this out of the way, let's talk about DevSecOps and how AI can help us get more efficient. DevSecOps, think about where are you in your DevSecOps journey in the next couple of minutes. Maybe you are planning, maybe you're working on code, maybe you deploy code, you're doing observability, deployment, whatnot. And then consider what is the most inefficient task you do on a daily basis, whether it's spending hours on reviews, debugging broken pipelines, or security vulnerabilities that need to be understood. And then combine it and say, well, what happens if AI could help me with that? Like starting with an assessment of your workflows, establishing guardrails for AI, bringing that into workflows, measuring the impact, because just having AI, because everyone has it, doesn't probably not prove the impact and the return of investment, and then adopt best practices. And I have a couple of reference URLs on the slides, but at the end of the talk, there's a QR code and some links, so you can access them later on, and the slides are already public. So don't worry about not being able to click on that specific link now. Oops. As for the first step in DevSecOps, I want to dive a little bit into development or dev, like from planning, managing code, tests, docs, and reviews. And one of the things with AI was like, I wasn't even sure how to ask a question, so I treated it as a human being and said, please provide me with some help, like getting started with a new project, and then giving some specific instructions on what exactly I need. I want to start with a Go project, which build tools should I be using, what is the CI/CD configuration, hopefully as a generated example, certainly asking about code errors or some sec traces, sec faults, whatever comes up, and use the prompt with follow-up questions in the same context. So what I want is like an all-knowing chat prompt, and it's best either provided in the UI or in the IDE. And the example screenshot shows like a system prompt and also user response, how it could look like. Specifically, for example, instructing it to use the OpenTelemetry libraries to start a new Go observability tool if I wanted to build that. Now, the other thing is when I want to start with an issue, like actually planning the work, I usually spend a couple of hours or like a lot of minutes to write an issue, but I could also use an AI prompt and say, well, this is the short story. I want to get started with observability and my CI/CD pipelines, maybe OpenTelemetry, and then have AI generate a little more context out of that and then create the issue for me. Could be another use case to kind of use AI and write more verbose issue summaries. When I have created an issue, sometimes I'm joining a discussion which is endless, has 100 comments or even more, and it takes me a while to get into the conversation or into the discussion. And another use case of AI is to say, well, please summarize me the issue description and all the discussion in that issue. And as an example, many years ago, I wanted to implement or bring OpenTelemetry into GitLab CI/CD, and the issue is meanwhile quite long, but I was able to use AI to summarize the specific issue description and the discussion, and also ask like what could be actions from that, what is the planned work, what are the next steps, and so on. But again, another use case for that. If I want to map that on a specific prompt, and this is the Anthropic workbench using Claude 3.5, I can also just say, well, this is my system prompt, and then simulate a user response, which pastes or provides the content of the issue, might be downloaded via JSON or via URL, and then test that specific prompt, whether it fits into the environment, is usable, and so on. Jumping into code creation, and using AI with that. And I have two like scenarios from that. As a senior developer, I'm continuously learning new languages, but I also need to learn new language features. And as an example, I learned C++ 03 and 11 and stopped for many years. And nowadays we have like 14, 17, 20, 23 even. And I can use AI to learn these new programming language features. On the other side, I can also generate boilerplate code. Like I hate regex, or like I use regex, but I have troubles generating them and verifying whether it works. I can use AI for that, or even like complex libraries. It can be a little distracting to just build it on my own versus having AI providing me with some help with that. On the other side, if I'm a beginner in a language, it might be hard to understand algorithms or complex architectures. And sometimes I need to learn fast because the project needs to be finished in 2 weeks' time. Or should have been finished 2 weeks ago. And this can also lead to human errors, whereas AI could help me with that. So last year I used AI to learn Rust much faster than any tutorial could provide me. And it was a great example of where AI could help me get more efficient. From a technical implementation perspective, there's like code suggestions, which knows the context and then provides inline auto-completions for code blocks or for multiple lines or a single line. So it can continue an algorithm, can add missing dependencies. So I was adding a comment, say, please add all the missing Go imports because the code is long and I have no idea. Or even like continue a class method for printing a string object or printing the object as string in Java, as shown in the screenshot on the side. How it works, like this needs an integration into an IDE. Different vendors do that already. The user types in the IDE. The extension sort of detects as you type the intent and then takes the content to an LLM, receives it, and then prints it grayed out for the user to either accept using, I think tab is pretty common, or you can just continue typing. The other thing which I'm excited about is like code generation, like becoming a prompt engineer as a developer. You can use code comments to really instruct the LLM to generate like a library or specific functionality, functions, boilerplate code, classes, anything which is like which works, and it's also great, you can refine that. So you can start with a single comment, add a new one. So like, I want to create, and in this example, it's, the idea was to create a Kubernetes observability tool, so basically printing some ports and deployments and services on the command line, just by generating code. In the background, this was using Claude 3.5, and it almost generated all of the code. I needed to do some little fixing here and there, but in the end, the screenshot at the bottom was purely AI-generated code, being able to export the kubeconfig and then print the number of ports and services in the cluster. I also did a recording, which is linked here. On the other side, if I have source code and I want to understand what it does, maybe by joining a new team or maintaining some new code, maybe the bug needs to be fixed, or even worse, a vulnerability needs to be fixed and I have no idea what the code does because the person who wrote the code left 10 years ago. There's no unit test, there's no documentation. It's like developer nightmare, developer hell. And the great thing about AI is here, if you provide it with the context, it's able to summarize and provide an explanation of the source code. You can even go further and say, well, I want to refine the prompt and say, not only explain it to me, but focus on the algorithm, or explain it to me in like I'm 5. This also works, like very high level. Or focus on specific performance regressions, or on a specific why would this code throw an error in a specific use case? And this is actually super helpful to use that in that way. And you can also use follow-up questions in the chat prompt to continue and say, well, this explanation is great, but actually I have a question about if I would refactor that into classes, what could happen, or what would be the best practices in the wider community or development environment. As an example prompt, how it could look like in Anthropic in the workbench, like showing a system prompt, and then copy pasting in the source code, and then getting a summary of like what does the code do. I can also instruct the prompt to say put the summary on top, or put it on at the bottom, or even leave it out, and just provide me with like a short summary, or even get a suggestion of rewrite it if I want to. The other thing, which is great, and I have written quite a few unit tests in my career, but I still hate it, like generating tests for all the specific cases, unit tests, and so on, and also focusing on, for example, extreme cases like a division by 0 or -1, a buffer overflow, or something which makes the application crash or do weird behavior. And this is also a way of using AI to really generate tests for that specific selected source code in that example. And I can also refine the prompt and say, well, I think by default, if you select C++ and say create tests, it uses the Google test framework. But if, for instance, I use the Boost framework, which I did many years ago, I can instruct the prompt and say, please generate tests, but use the Boost framework in C++, or use Jest in JavaScript, or specific other frameworks in that example. And again, you can use that prompt to test and to kind of implement that, for example, in the workbench, and refine the system prompt and say, well, you are an expert in that specific thing, and also give that specific feedback to the user, provide help, and also, for example, encourage to ask follow-up questions, which the user might have. Where should I put this, or how it works? And last but not least, for all the code parts, oftentimes you want to improve the code quality, or like refactor certain code parts, which is also helpful using AI, and I've been playing a lot with that in the previous weeks and months. So you can refactor the code to make it more readable, but you can also refactor the code to improve the performance, like again, refining the prompt, and giving even more instructions on what to test and what to do. And also it's possible like to follow up in the chat prompt and say, okay, this refactoring was great, but maybe we can just use this specific library because we are dependent on using a specific Go library, for example, implementing a key vector database or similar. And again, this is the raw prompt which you can use. It's also documented in the linked repository, which can be a helpful way to improve the code quality and not spend too much time into long refactoring stories. Now, the great thing about refactoring is also AI or LLMs are capable of refactoring from a specific source code like Python, like Perl into Python, or C into Rust. You can even refactor Go into Rust or Python. So I've tested different scenarios, and all of them it was possible to get working code after it was generated. It's even possible to learn COBOL, which I learned is a pretty old language. And there's a blog post linked here which also embeds the COBOL example. I had no idea how it works. Now I used AI to understand it and also fix a missing period. So I learned the period similar to semicolon, super important in COBOL. And I was even able like to refactor COBOL into Python because the LLM said it's better in Python. So it's a great example of how you can use AI to even like migrate maybe legacy code into modern code, but also like get onto new code quality version or implement new language features. Certainly a lot what you can do, coming from code more into reviews, like summarizing merge request changes, takes quite a while. So I'm creating a merge request and summarizing which Git commits I had in there could take a while. This is how AI could help get us more efficient, like summarizing code changes, but also filling in merge request templates, and also suggested reviewers. So the last one is a GitLab-specific feature, but I wanted to mention it because it uses the contribution charts and trains a local model, and then provides with a list of, hey, from the 2,000 team members, these 5 of them could be the ones you could ask for a review, because otherwise the list is endless, and you probably need to ping in Slack or somewhere else how to get someone to review that. Now, this was a lot about development. The next stage, or the next thing I want to look into, is security, like understanding and mitigating vulnerabilities, security scanning, all the fancy buzzwords, I would say. But the most impactful thing is, like, you have a security vulnerability, the incident is going on, customers are calling, you need a hot fix, but you also need a long-term fix. So hot fixing could be like it works, but maybe it breaks some edge cases, and the long-term fix should provide stability and so on. The problem with most of the vulnerabilities, and I debugged a lot in the past and also broke many production environments after fixing them. What is a format string vulnerability? What is command injection, timing attacks, or even like buffer overflow? And how to fix that code without breaking something else. And I mean, I have written a lot of C code in my career, but maybe others have not, and you're just staring at the screen like, okay, it's interesting, there's probably a fix for that, but what happens? And one of the things where AI can be helpful is vulnerability explanation. So get an understanding how an attacker actually can use that to exploit that, to break it, to do something bad, and also get a better understanding how on the why and how to fix it, especially when it's urgent, and you should fix it now. Again, it needs a chat prompt or some UI integrations, but you could use, for example, a prompt similar to saying, you're a software vulnerability developer, explain the vulnerability with that given source code, and also provide an example how to fix it. So I, as a developer, can say, okay, this is a great fix for that problem. Let's copy paste that, create a merge request, run the CI/CD pipelines and security scanning again, and then it gets maybe auto-merged into production or follows the typical workflows. On the other side, I could also say, well, maybe I want to automate that as well. So using sort of vulnerability resolutions, because an explanation still requires manual work, might need some more reviews, more code implementation, dependencies, and so on. And the merge request can also be triggered, like when a vulnerability gets scanned or you asked prompt. In order to create a merge request in GitLab in this example, which implements a diff, which patches the vulnerability, the merge request is automatically generated or created. It triggers CI/CD and security scans automatically. And in the end, I, as a developer or as a security or DevOps engineer, only need to review and approve that. Which hopefully we will see more about in the future, because I think fixing vulnerabilities is not everyone's favorite. At least not mine. I wasted a lot of lifetime fixing such things. Last but not least, from an ops perspective, using AI or finding a use case for that, think about root cause analysis for incidents, observability, error tracking, performance, and so on. And there's a couple of ideas around that, but I want to focus on one of the things, like my pipeline is running, everything is blocked, developers are like doing something else. This was, by the way, the reason when the pipeline was running in my previous job, I was super active in the monitoring forum and helped the community. And people were like, where do you have the time? I said, yeah, the pipeline is running. Or I couldn't even fix it. And the problem here is oftentimes you have a stack trace. It's endless. Sometimes there's a hint in the logs hidden somewhere. So in this example, it tries to pull a Golang image. using maybe a wrong tag or something like that, but it's not immediately visible, except you're an expert in that area. And it's always a middle ground of like how much time is spent with reading, trying, debugging, and fixing. Whereas on the other hand, if I could use AI, like using the CI/CD job log, sending it to the LLM, and then getting a chat prompt or a response back, which summarizes the problem for me and also gives me a recommended fix of, for example, using the correct tag. So I used a slash on purpose, which is wrong, but instead a Docker image tag needs to use the colon, which can be a great way to kind of analyze and debug CI/CD job logs and use root cause analysis for that. You can also build it yourself, so like using a specific prompt, which also in this example instructs the prompt to explain it for everyone, because everyone should be able to fix a pipeline. So it shouldn't be like the one responsible for it, but as a developer I also would need to move fast. And so you can actually like use that prompt and start analyzing it. Another example for AI, or maybe it's in this specific regard, it's a little more machine learning. There's Kepler, which is Kubernetes efficient power level exporter to manage, to monitor and observe like the power consumption in Kubernetes clusters. And it also uses machine learning models to do estimates and forecasts on the power consumption, which is also, I think, a great use case for AI and ML. And last but not least, I've found recently K8s GPT, which allows you to observe Kubernetes deployments. And oftentimes there's a deployment which fails, or there's some specific problems with that. And I thought, okay, it's a really great implementation. It also has a chat prompt, but I don't have an OpenAI key. I don't have a specific other SaaS LLM. And I wanted to make it work with Olama, which is a local LLM distribution framework, so I can run it on my MacBook. And it also is compatible with OpenAI. So I built a use case, which I want to show you quickly, where I have like a failed Kubernetes cluster, which is already running. So you'll need to trust me on that it's broken. And yeah, I started a demo yesterday. I have a deployment which has a crash loop backoff. And I also have a bad application which uses an image which I think doesn't exist. But this is sort of the demo case. And there is let's just execute the script, analyze, which kind of calls K8s GPT and then sends the error which it finds to the LLM with a specific prompt and then asks it to analyze it and provide help how to fix it. And my MacBook is not super slow, so this works much faster if you give it a lot of hardware and GPU power. But I'm hoping the 4 problems get analyzed, if I can talk over this. And the idea here is you can also do that offline in your environment. So if your network doesn't have internet connection and you need to debug the Kubernetes clusters, you can use local LLMs to do that. It just needs sort of like hosting the LLMs somewhere. But this should work and provides me with some input of, for example, the bad app deployment. It indicates the Kubernetes is unable to pull the image not exist. Okay. This could be to some incorrect image name. And the interactive mode allows me to say, well, show, or I say always, please show me. This helps me, otherwise I couldn't interact with like a chat prompt. So for me it's a human being. Please show me the lines to fix the problem. And I don't know exactly how long it will take, but this is an example, like I can refine the prompt and say, well, hopefully it provides me with the output to just fix the specific line in that YAML configuration. If it doesn't work, okay, this is probably the screenshot is too small, or can you read the screenshot over there? where I asked a similar question, and it said, well, in that YAML, there's one image configuration, you should use the correct image name, or in the Nginx example, it also said, in that specific section, you can fix that. So it could be an example to say, well, I don't understand the different deployment errors in Kubernetes, and I use K8s GPT with a local Olama and the Mistral LLM in order to analyze and fix the broken Kubernetes deployments. Certainly, K8s GPT works with a wide range of AI and LLM providers. Now, for moving AI into the DevSecOps workflows, we also need to think about guardrails. So like considering privacy, data security, but also performance and validation. So when you think about data, is my data used to train the models again? This should be a hard no, because you don't want to leak any proprietary data or confidential data. Is my data sent to a SaaS provider? So maybe my policies require me to use local LLMs or something like that. Certainly some AI features might memorize my data. So ask the one providing you with the features, is their retention policy best set to 0 days, just delete it immediately? And also is there public statement on data usage and privacy? And the how is ask your DevOps and their provider about these questions, because they're super important to keep data secure and not just leak it somewhere because AI could use it in that way. From a security perspective, think about governance control, so like who has access to AI features and models in the company or in the environment. Also consider like blocking content being sent to prompts. Validating the prompt responses to avoid user exploitation, which is a common thing with LLM prompts and chat prompts, and also like have these requirements for AI vendors, and also consider like creating trainings for team members how to use the chat prompts efficiently, but also consider not putting sensitive data into every chat prompt because it's so easy. On the transparency side, document everything, like how is AI being used, what is the development, the availability, have some principles around that. Also, like think about if I switch the LLM or the provider switches the LLM, what is the impact on my features, on my production systems, and so on. At GitLab, we've created an AI transparency center, and I think everyone should have that, really to get the insight and the idea behind that. From a performance and observability point of view, it's typically it's infrastructure monitoring depending on where the LLM is running, which cloud resources are being used, if the GPUs are burning when the LLMs are self-hosted, but you also need to like validate the LLMs that, themselves. There's open LLMetry. I cannot pronounce it, open telemetry with LLMs, which can be helpful. And our teams are also using tracing with Langsmith. And certainly also an area if you consider self-hosting and maintaining your own LLM infrastructure. From a validation perspective, LLMs tend to hallucinate. Sometimes it says, I have provided the snippets above and nothing happens. And then I ask, well, sorry, you forgot about them. I said, oh yeah, sorry, certainly I will send you the snippets now. But this is something you need to kind of discover before the users discover that and say, well, it doesn't work. So finding a way to measure the quality of service, defining some metrics like similarity scores or having an LLM judge another LLM. This is something we do at GitLab to verify the quality of our LLMs, but certainly other ways of that. So this is a lot to read and dive into, but I would also recommend to doing that after the talk or async. One thing I want to highlight or mention is AI impact. It's a new area. It's hard to do that. So like really measuring the effectiveness beyond the developer productivity metrics. So you can certainly use DORA metrics to measure like pipelines, deployment frequency, and so on. But also like how often are the code suggestions being accepted? How often is a vulnerability resolution actually helping prevent an incident or something? So I think it's an exciting new era. We are building it on our own, so I would certainly recommend following the space and also asking, when you're buying or getting an AI vendor into your environment, ask the questions of like, what are the metrics for measuring the effective usage or the efficiency by installing AI. There's certainly a lot of considerations, like integrating that, putting guardrails, and also validation and AI impact. And there's some more advanced topics. I will quickly go over them, but I also don't want to overload you. I only want to keep you updated on like retrieval augmented generation, which means if the LLM cannot answer the question because it's on data which is too old, maybe trained in 2022 or even earlier. There's a way to kind of split documents into embeddings into a vector database and then have the LLM use that vector database to answer a current question about it. And one example could be to build out like a knowledge base. So for example, embedding the GitLab handbook or even like the GitLab documentation into a vector database. And when I have a specific question about GitLab CI/CD or configuration or even configuring Kubernetes with GitLab, the chat prompt knows, oh, I'm using, or the LLM knows, I'm using the embeddings and provide the user an answer because the LLM itself is too old to provide a current and up-to-date version. I've built that myself, so can also build that. It's linked over here, like using Ollama locally, Qtrend as a vector DB, and explore that and learn like in a playful way with a little Python and LangChain in order to kind of build that yourself. I tried that with the GitLab handbook, which took a little longer on my MacBook to load into the vector database because it's 2,000 pages long, but it works. Just a few examples. And last but not least, everyone talks about AI and LLM agents. This is another way of like when RAG is not enough, you can, the LLM can call a tool or call an agent and say, I want to know what the current weather is, or I want to know the current state of the Kubernetes deployment, and then collect all the data and then take action on that. And this is a hot space, I would say. Too much to follow, but it can also be an enabler to provide you with more efficiency from an active perspective. I hope I don't overload you now, but I would recommend checking out the links on that page. To sum up, to achieve DevSecOps efficiency, I think it's important to define the use cases, the workflows. Don't try to implement AI everywhere, but you can. But it's helpful from a developer's perspective. Anything that is repetitive or has low test coverage or has bugs, use code suggestions, generate tests, explain refactor. From a security perspective, vulnerability explanation, resolution, and team know-how. And from an ops perspective, root cause analysis and KDS GPT to get started with. That being said, thanks for attention. The resources are here, so this QR code links directly to the slide deck and also to the GitLab project where you can access the resources. Everything is open source. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this session. We have a couple of questions, which is good. Let's go from the top then, as the first one. So, as a company with high security requirements, how much can I trust that current available LLMs help my code in a sufficient way?
I would say ask the vendor or the provider. So if you're using a vendor or provider to use the correct LLMs, these specific questions of like, what are the use cases, for example, for refactoring a code or have code suggestions provided. And if you're hosting it yourself, you might need to fine tune the system prompt. So the user prompt is what you see in the chat prompt, and the system prompt is what gives detailed instructions to the LLM, saying like, you're a source code or you're an engineering expert, please do that. And certainly it might need some fine tuning.
How many approaches do you need to make AI generate sensible statements about code? For me, this worked at most 50% of the time since December 2023.
So I think it needs some practice, and I've also seen the quality rising. So we've been using Anthropic Claude 2.1 last year, and now we're at 3 or 3.5, which is either Sonnet or Haiku. And the quality improved over time, so the LLM better understands what I want. I've learned to refine the prompt and say, well, I need to refine the prompt in a way of saying, this is the problem, this is what I want, and maybe give some new instructions. So, for example, I have this bug in Python. Please help me understand it, provide source code examples, and also other references that could help me as a beginner. And from there, I kept practicing a lot. Many things are documented on the GitLab blog, like how to use one of our products with chat, but I think it's also applicable if you have your own, so you can kind of copy what I learned.
Nice, very cool. Another one still. So when you use AI to summarize discussions, how much do you have to correct, add, or delete on an average due to AI being AI? Any weak estimation you can provide?
It's a good question. I don't really have an answer for that, so I don't have data. Certainly, I would treat AI still like as a partner, not as a replacement. So that AI is the all-knowing thing, that's totally fair to assume, but I would question it and say, well, AI can hallucinate or make things up. So in some cases, it's still valuable to say, okay, I'm not sure about the next steps. I read it myself in the discussion or in the summary, or even like ask a human being who's responsible or assigned to the issue, just to ensure. But generally, I would say it's helpful in many cases, but numbers are hard. I think this will come as we do more with AI.
Got it. How would you test benchmark or benchmark the accuracy, correctness of these generated responses if you don't want to end up checking, correcting, arguing with the LLM? I think it's related to the hallucination issues that we all know about.
Yes, at GitLab we have developed the central evaluation framework, which kind of uses the certain metrics and judges and also figuring out, like running test cases at scale, like the human XEval framework works in a similar way. So kind of ensuring everything that our customers and users are capable of using in GitLab. So in GitLab it's called GitLab Duo, to ensure that the quality of responses in chat, for example, is better, and also being able to detect it before the customer detects it, that it doesn't work. But AI is not predictable, so sometimes it's really like, oh yeah, there's something wrong with that.
Got it. Speaking about Duo, we have a question about it. Duo is able to help rewrite Atlassian Bamboo plans to GitLab CI. Should be possible if it knows how to rewrite COBOL to modern languages. Whoa.
I mean, I didn't try it with Bamboo yet, but I've Abu Bakr on my team did a migration guide from Bamboo to GitLab CI/CD. But I'm up for the challenge for next week, maybe, trying it out. What I did was I used a Jenkins file and then converted it to GitLab CI/CD, so that's possible. And I think it's probably vice versa, or whatever you want to do. Think about use cases which don't make sense and just try AI and GitLab Duo on it.
Yeah, good advice. 3 last questions. Which OLAMA model do you suggest on a MacBook regarding fastest responses and proper solutions?
So I've been trying Mistral with an S. There's also Mixtral, which requires, I think, 50 gigabytes of RAM, which I don't have. So the Mistral works, but there are also smaller language models. I think one of them is Llama, which is more focused on code specifically from Meta. There's Phi2 from Microsoft, but I haven't tested them all. So it's like figuring out the best cases. At GitLab, we are working on self-hosted models for customers, so the teams are also testing that. There's documentation for that, for self-hosted models, which could give some insights also for Olama.
One last question, funny this one. Is it a good idea to use AI suggestions and completions as a beginner? Is it smart to not learn and understand language-specific principle first? And what you don't see here is there's a lovely emoji GitLab says. So you have love. The question comes from someone who loves GitLab.
I think it can be a great way to get into a language fast if you don't want to get blocked by specific syntax. But if you're more of a learner type who wants to get like examples and implement and write everything yourself, I would probably vote against using AI. For myself, I'm more like an experienced developer, and I feel blocked if I need to understand in Rust what a macro is and what this is, and I'm like, sorry. And I want to move fast and I want to see how it works. So for me, it was helpful and useful. I would just recommend trying it out and figuring out, like testing it in your workflows and try to maybe change habits. And if it doesn't work, okay, there might be other use cases for AI, like refactoring, for example.
Great. The last question, very interesting one. What if the proposed AI code is copyright protected? Do you ever experience such a case?
So we're working with LLM providers that use open source code for training their models. I don't think we have that case, but it's certainly a good question to keep in mind and say, if the vendor cannot answer the question how the models are trained, it's probably a no-go for using them. Yeah.
All right, so that's it for the questions. Thank you so much for all the interesting questions. Michael, thank you so much for this session.